Arcsystem has announced their newest fighting game, which for brevity's sake I shall be referring to as Marvel FighterZ, and it basically killed any hope for Marvel vs. Capcom 4, at least in the immediate future. But the game itself? Well, the 4v4 idea is interesting, but I'm really concerned about how bad the Touch of Death combos will be, given that they got increasingly easy to pull off in Dragon Ball FighterZ as they added the DLC characters. And Touch of Death makes it so that the process of learning how to get good at a fighting game boils down into never get hit. But all of that can wait until we learn more about the proper mechanics. For now, who all is going to be playable? What's the roster going to be? We have 8 characters revealed, and the 4v4 nature would, hopefully, provide a large enough roster to minimize mirror matches. But it's kind of hard to actually predict a roster, because we don't have any idea how large it's going to be. It's not like the trailer said, over 40 of your favorite Marvel heroes and villains. And Arcsystem rosters are all over the place, ranging from upwards of 30+ playable characters to rosters in the single digits. We might have a Marvel vs. Capcom 3-sized roster, or it might be another Mario Strikers Battle League. So, with an unknown roster size, I have to be a bit creative here. So, I made a tier list. I know, shocking coming from me, but everyone has their own default solution to creative problem solving. Some people make a love triangle, I make spreadsheets. Each tier will consist of exactly 8 characters. I tried to keep in mind what they said in the interviews, with the roster having the faces of Marvel, fan favorites, and some unexpected choices. So, while this won't be 100% objective, I tried to make it more than just my personal favorites. So, let's dive in. The S tier are the 8 characters that we know are in the game from the trailer. This consists of Storm, Doctor Doom, Captain America, Ghost Rider, Miss Marvel, Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Star-Lord. I'm not going to waste too much time on these since, again, these are the only characters we actually know, but there were 2 things that stood out to me. One, I love Kamala Khan's new design. From the little details they added to her outfit, the unkempt hair, the red eyes, her more eager body language, it's a very kendo take on the character, and I'm all for it. The second detail, while much smaller, is I'm happy to see Star-Lord having his elemental guns. It was what I liked about him in the community edits of Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and those alongside his jet boost make him way more interesting than your standard gunfighter. But beyond that, S tier is just who we already know is in the game. Moving on to A tier, this consists of fighters I'd be willing to put money on appearing in the game if I was a gambling man. First, we have the Hulk and Thor, the 2 remaining major Avengers that appeared in the MCU and the MVC series. When it comes to the new art style that Arcsystem's giving the characters, I imagine these 2 will not be the biggest benefactors of it, and that might be why they weren't chosen for the trailer, assuming it wasn't something like them not being ready for gameplay yet, of course. Onto the X-Men, the 2 safe bets are Wolverine and Cyclops. Wolverine is still one of the most popular X-Men, even with Fox dropping the ball on the X-Men films and Disney refusing to do anything with the characters they spent $70 billion to acquire. But even then, Wolverine is still who most people think of with the term X-Men, either being played by Hugh Jackman or voiced by Steve Blum. Legal reasons or Disney being upset that a toy doesn't belong to them are usually the only thing that keeps them out of these fighting games. And if X-Men are back on the menu, Cyclops needs to be one of them. There are only 2 characters who consistently take the lead of the X-Men away from Xavier, Storm and Cyclops. And if you have to boil the X-Men down to a bare minimum of 3 characters, Storm, Cyclops, and Wolverine are pretty good choices. For some villains, this is another easy choice, Magneto and Thanos. These 2 are the de facto Marvel villains for their respective generations. Just as those who grew up with the X-Men cartoon think of Magneto as the Marvel bad guy, those who followed the 3 phases of the MCU for a decade will remiss about Thanos in the same manner. One gives magnet powers, one has the Infinity Gauntlet. These 2 are definitely hitting that fan favorite camp, as well as being reliable faces of Marvel. Speaking of fan favorites, the last 2 in this tier are Black Panther and Venom. Venom was always one of the more popular Spider-Man villains, and Black Panther became a household name thanks to the MCU. Though, maybe this time the King of Wakanda will have more than just claws for his weapons. Also, if they gave Venom a deeper voice like he had in the movies, I wouldn't complain. At this point, I would like to cheat real quick and make an A- tier, specifically for the Fantastic Four. I didn't want to devote half a proper tier list to them, but come on. This is a 4v4 fighting game, and Marvel's first family is a family of 4. But with that quick adjustment, we have the 20 characters I'd call the safest bets to make. I'm positive there's going to be more than 20, or at least I'm incredibly optimistic and hoping for as such, but this is as far as the objective calls go. Starting with the B tier, the choices are definitely still plausible, but start inching towards personal preference. The predictions officially end, and the wish list has officially begun. First up is Deadpool. The Merc with the Mouth is the first character a lot of people would love to see that I could see being passed on. Shame really, given that his personality is what most want from him in any given context. But his combat abilities, at least in the context of a fighting game, are only so-so. He has guns, he has swords, and he can teleport if you can manage to balance that, and if you don't just go with Nightcrawler instead. But for me personally, I would much rather have Wade be present. Especially since he could be useful for any given single-player mode. Since he's an anti-hero who fights for money first, well, at least on paper, they don't really use that these days, it could be easy to justify him fighting against the heroes in any given situation, and it wouldn't be hard to convince him to switch sides in all likelihood. Up next is Scarlet Witch. I feel confident in saying this roster is due for a proper magic user, and she's literally a witch. It's in the name. This was originally going to be Doctor Strange, but I'm a bit burnt out on him, and Scarlet Witch was done real dirty by the MCU. I think she deserves a better appearance if you ask me. Plus, she can serve as another villain to fight periodically in the story mode. She was originally a member of the Brotherhood of Evil. Well, okay, originally is not exactly accurate, but you get it, historically. And besides, flip-flopping between heroes and villains is nothing new for her. Moving over to the realm of Spider-Man, we have Black Cat. I imagine her playing like Jill does in UMVC, at least as far as the basic moves go, but what I'm interested in is how her bad luck powers would translate to a fighting game. My guess is that she could generate a force field that causes projectiles to either suddenly disintegrate or somehow magically miss her. Think about how Scout's Atomic Punch in TF2 technically results in you missing hits. Except she'd still be allowed to fight back and physical attacks would still hit her. She's also another character who can be both heroic and self-serving. So if this game has some sort of adventure mode like Dragon Ball FighterZ did, she's another villain to work with. But on the note of adventure modes, I think we have enough morally ambiguous characters. We need more definitive bastards in the roster. And I say we stick with Spider-Man just a bit longer to get Green Goblin. Okay, admittedly, some friends and I had a recent movie night where we watched the first Sam Raimi movie, so that version is what I think of when I think of the character. And yeah, I would prefer if they went with the movie's armored look for that reason, but I wouldn't complain if he was a man in armor or an actual goblin. Either way, I say take advantage of Sony's involvement and get more than the bare minimum of Spider-Man in one of these fighting games for a change. Plus, I've always been curious about how his hoverboard would be incorporated into one of these games. Up next, we have a 2-for-1 deal, Gambit and Rogue. These are the two other major X-Men people think of thanks to the 80s cartoon. Gambit is a staff fighter who, courtesy of his mutant powers, can turn playing cards into exploding shuriken. And Rogue absorbed Captain Marvel's powers to have constant super strength and durability, plus she can copy certain moves from each character like she did in the Capcom games. While I cannot guarantee that they'd be playable, I'd be shocked if they weren't. Sticking with the X-Men for a little longer, I'd also expect, and personally like, to see the Juggernaut appear. Another grappler would be appreciated, but I feel like another thing this roster is lacking currently is jobbers. You know, those villains lower on the food chain that could be defeated and scared off with relative ease by the heroes. Well, okay, I don't think any victory over the Juggernaut would ever be described as with ease, but you get what I mean. Besides, he got screwed over in the last few Marvel vs. Capcom titles. Speaking of characters overdue for a Versus title appearance, Blackheart. The villain of Ghost Rider capable of brainwashing characters, he serves as another potential villain for any given adventure mode. Given he's a literal embodiment of evil from hell itself, I'd say he's a fine choice for a final antagonist if needed. Failing that, he could be an Akuma-style secret fighter that you can go up against under certain circumstances. And you could then unlock a more quote-unquote balanced version of him if you beat him. However, as far as a 28-character roster goes, it's not really living up to one of their big promises. Oh sure, 28 is a fine roster size, but if the unexpected picks really just amounts to having a villain that hasn't been seen since 2007, that'd be a letdown. So to quickly get some less obvious characters, we're gonna jump ahead to D tier. This'll be a rapid-fire section of 8 characters who can reuse elements or entire movesets from characters in the S, A, and B tiers. For example, Gwenpool can use moves from Deadpool, Miles and Silk can use elements from Spider-Man, War Machine from Iron Man, X-23 from Wolverine, Carnage from Venom, Polaris from Magneto, and US Agent is literally Captain America with a gun. Now, this doesn't mean these characters have to be clones. In fact, I'd be very disappointed if X-23 was just female Wolverine after MVC3. I'm just saying that if the roster needs extra characters on short notice, it would suffice. And it can add some lesser thought of characters, aside from Miles, if they're willing to record the extra dialogue. Okay, let's get back to where we were with C tier, as these are the characters that not many people, if anyone, really want in the game besides me. But, in doing so, these 8 all have great possibilities to be part of that unexpected additions category, albeit to varying degrees. If all 8 were selected, the final roster would be 36 characters. About as optimistic as I'm willing to get, and assuming I was even right up until this point in the first place. But hey, since we're finally getting off of autopilot, let's get some clips ready for these guys.
Domino has what she calls probability manipulation. I call it dumbass luck. She used to spend her time as a mercenary like me, which makes her even hotter. But now she works with the good guys, like the X-Men. She'll come back.
Out of all the X-Men, Domino was the one I never see any requests for in these fighting games, be it Marvel vs. Capcom 4 or just a standalone Marvel fighter. Hell, Thorgy, Mr. Build the Roster himself, didn't include her in his X-Men fighting game. And on a surface level, I get it. Someone's power being good luck isn't the most compelling set of skills. But improbable good luck on a gunslinger? That's where I find her untapped potential to be. Instead of just firing a machine gun forward, imagine firing an SMG behind her and then they bounce off the back wall, each bullet flying in a less predictable angle, resulting in a makeshift shotgun-like blast. Or firing that SMG at the ceiling and it ricochets off in a hailstorm of small projectiles. Let Domino fire a pistol into the air and the bullet always falls on the opponent's position a moment later. She can also have a move where she twirls a Glock in her hand and then fires it into the ground, bouncing up as an anti-air. But pressing the light, medium, or heavy attack while she's twirling determines the angle it's fired at, making it a decent mix-up option. This, on top of the standard gunslinger moveset, would make her a much more interesting character, and it's why I passed on characters like Black Widow in favor of her. Oh yeah, she also has knives.
Time to make my entrance.
Another Marvel character you just don't see too many requests for, although his makes a little more sense to me, especially for the Marvel vs. Capcom 4 hypotheticals. Dude has a good deal going for him. His wings can be used for melee combat as well as flight, he has a deployable combat drone, dual wields machine guns, and he's a recognizable name thanks to the MCU. But if the Marvel side of the roster was not going to get more than 16 to 20 characters, he becomes a very hard character to justify giving one of those coveted slots to. But that's not an issue here, is it? If the roster is approaching or passing the 30 mark, and there's still a desire for less obvious but notable characters, why not go with the Falcon? Dude has a lot going for him. His wings can be used for melee combat as well as flight, he has a deployable combat drone, he dual wields machine guns, and he's a fairly recognizable character thanks to the MCU.
Whatever evil the hand is invoking can stay in hell. I'll send you there to greet it instead.
I want to be clear, if Daredevil is used instead, no complaints from me. I just think there's a few cases where a side character has a strong enough presence to represent a series, and Elektra is one such example for the Daredevil side of the Marvelverse. She's another character with forms of mind control powers. I swear I'm not trying to make that a running theme here. And so the narrative possibilities of forcing the heroes to fight each other are there. Although her possession abilities would probably be a more interesting take on that. But honestly, I just think Psy users don't get to appear enough in fighting games outside of whenever the Ninja Turtles are involved. And I do have a soft spot for Elektra thanks to her standalone movie. On the subject of her character though, if Arcsystem is given a lot of creative freedoms with the lore of their version of Marvel, you could make it so that Blackheart is the demonic monster that the Hand worship and that Elektra gets her powers from, instead of the Beast. It'd hardly be the first time her origins were messed with, and I'd wager it wouldn't be the last. And her role as an assassin could make her an easy fit into an antagonistic role without needing any mind control powers.
Hey there, Captain Douche. You know, I don't appreciate you killing my target before I could. Now I need to collect from your sorry ass.
Should I be incredible?
What the hell? Why is this happening?
My introduction to Mr. Sinister was the Deadpool game, although he's changed quite a bit since then, and I'm not sure if I prefer it. I get wanting to make him more than just, well, sinister, but I'm not crazy about the more posh and flamboyant traits he's been given, and I just straight up don't like how crazy some stories make him. When I think of an ideal Mr. Sinister, I imagine someone like Orochimaru, a completely amoral scientist who's fascinated with how far he can push science, and will break the laws of man or nature to do it, not a catty Mad Hatter in a lab coat. But while I would hope that Arcsystem would be allowed some creative liberties with him, there's a reason he's on my wish list. Remember how the adventure mode in Dragon Ball FighterZ worked, where you fought disposable clones to level up for the bigger fights? Well, Mr. Sinister happens to specialize in cloning. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, that wasn't something the Deadpool game made up. Mr. Sinister likes to have as many disposable lives as possible, be it for experiments, research, or mercenary work. And so, he'd be a great choice for a major villain in a solo mode, should the need for such clones arise. His ability to transmutate his body into just about anything also makes him a blank slate of a fighter, while his emphasis on mental powers could justify him fighting like M. Bison. But, getting back to the story ideas for him, Mr. Sinister wouldn't be operating on clones alone. He has the Marauders. However, most of them are not great choices for a fighting game. They tend to be fairly one-note and/or very expendable, and they're not always that unique. Sure, Blockbuster could be a gameplay clone of The Thing, or maybe Malice could possess a random character and have the option to take over a defeated fighter like Baby. Although, in this case, would that even count as a unique character? Regardless, there is one Marauder that I thought had enough to earn a slot on the list.
Think you're clever? Think you're cool? You ain't the only one with power, little geek.
Arclight's power is simple. She can create shockwaves, and her body has the superhuman strength, stamina, and durability to withstand her powers. Nothing too special there, but it's enough to work with. For example, her powers could include making the ground immediately around her shake violently, having her send a single shockwave forward on the ground, or having her rapidly rush forward to grab an opponent, create shockwaves that vibrate throughout them, and then violently throw them forward. And that's on top of the fact that she would probably hit really hard. However this game plays, I can't imagine that she'd be hard to make a moveset for. And, like Juggernaut, she gives a more entry-level villain for the characters to fight on the regular. That's really all there is to say for Arclight. She's very straightforward but has more unique powers to offer than the other Marauders. But with that said, I think there's a need for extra antagonists, particularly in the form of mercenaries that work for Mr. Sinister. I won't be going with Scalp Hunter, however. Instead, I have two other characters in mind. First is...
Copycat? Oh man, I just got a killer right there.
So, how many of you knew that Deadpool's girlfriend in the comics was his wife and a mutant? Not just any mutant, but a shapeshifter. Not only that, she's a contender for one of the most powerful shapeshifters in the Marvelverse. Unlike other shapeshifters, such as Mystique, Copycat isn't limited to just physical appearance. She can also copy the powers, personalities, memories, and clothing of any target, becoming truly indistinguishable from the source. This, along with her ability to turn her nails into claws, and her proficiency with basic weaponry, is why I went with her over the Marauder's Malice. This is also one of the characters I had a very distinct idea for in this game. Please observe this PowerPoint presentation displaying so. Let's say that by default she only has a single hyper combo, Copy. This move has a simple input with two variables at the end. The final direction decides who she copies. Up, back, and down are for her teammates, even if they're defeated, and front has her mimic her opponent's active fighter. The second variable is the attack input. If it's a light attack, she simply performs the target's most basic hyper combo and then turns back. If it's medium, she instead turns into the fighter proper for as long as she remains the active fighter. If it's heavy, she instead transforms and tags out, remaining as that transformed fighter for summon attacks until she becomes the active fighter again. I never thought I'd be championing Deadpool's ex-wife as a fighter, but the more I describe her, the more fun she starts to sound. However, she's also just one of two mercenaries I'd bring in, and honestly, we need a true mercenary. Wade and Vanessa may technically have the job description, but they normally need to be tricked or forced into going after someone who isn't a villain, and that's assuming Copycat isn't an X-Men in this game. This roster needs a mercenary whose morality begins and ends at a paycheck.
My version of a coonskin cap is basically me chewing on your skull.
Any money in pest control? Guess we're about to find out. Think you'll look good stuffed and mounted over my fireplace.
Yeah, that'll do. Taskmaster appeared in UMVC 3, so his general skills in gameplay in the context of a fighting game are pretty straightforward. He's a character who doesn't need a justification beyond money to fight someone. So, rather than spend your precious time on a character who's well-defined for what his role would be, how about a character who's instead never appeared outside of the comics?
8-Ball! They're coming from the left flank! Attaboy, 8-Ball! Keep that flank covered!
Yeah, that's as close to a clip of this guy as I can get. This is 8-Ball. He has a bulletproof helmet, a Q-stick that hits things at 1,000 times the normal strength, he has pool balls that explode on contact, and he has a giant flying 8-Ball that lets him pretend he's Static Shock. Yeah, if this guy were any less subtle, his real name would be Billy Yards. 8-Ball is the exact kind of indulgent character design people thought of it with comics back before the MCU. And man, do I miss these kind of characters. Like, yeah, it's nice that the films found an in-between of grounded and fantastical that audiences at large could get behind. But I miss when they weren't ashamed of being fake, of when you could just take a character design and run with it to the goofy extreme. 8-Ball fits that role while also meeting the criteria of, pardon the pun here, an oddball character that fighting games benefit from having. And I also wanted someone from a very different era of comics. Now, a lot of the time when these kind of characters get brought back, they're modernized, but for 8-Ball, I don't want that. I want this man to look like a lame Pepsi Man villain. Oh, if you're curious, narratively he would serve as a secondary scientist for Mr. Sinister, who's capable of basic combat. That is by no means his role in the original comics, but most of you didn't know this guy existed 5 minutes ago. And with that, we have my finalized roster. Going from confirmed to request, we have Storm, Doctor Doom, Captain America, Ghost Rider, Miss Marvel, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Star-Lord, Hulk, Thor, Wolverine, Cyclops, Magneto, Thanos, Black Panther, Venom, the Fantastic Four individually, Deadpool, Scarlet Witch, Black Cat, Green Goblin, Gambit, Rogue, Juggernaut, Blackheart, Domino, the Falcon, Elektra, Mr. Sinister, Arclight, Copycat, Taskmaster, and the Hail Mary pick of 8-Ball. All of that before any clone characters to expand the roster. And now, I would like to devote a final tier to the honorable mentions. Characters I want to include but left off for one reason or another. The Punisher. If the A- tier was expanded to a full proper 8, Punisher would have certainly been in there. Marvel has been interested in using Frank Castle again, so him being in Fighting Souls is plausible if not probable, especially after appearing in Marvel Rivals. But I didn't just want to stick with the obvious picks, and Ghost Rider does cover the same general appeal of him as a vigilante. Squirrel Girl. She is Marvel's de facto joke character, but I wasn't really feeling her this time. In part because I'm a bigger fan of her classic design, even if Marvel Rivals is probably the best the new design has ever looked, and I know they wouldn't go for her classic appearance. And speaking of Marvel Rivals, I think that's made her a more predictable choice for these kind of projects, which takes out a good deal of the appeal of a joke character. In the end, I decided that someone like 8-Ball would be a better example of a out-there choice. Sandman. He didn't get a priority spot, but if you've ever played as Gaara in a Naruto game, you have an idea of how he would play. And that does sound fun, but I have enough Spider-Man characters in this roster. Galacta. Probably one of Marvel's more underrated characters, given a new spotlight thanks to Rivals. She's a good way to have the Galactus moveset in a fighting game literally scaled down to a more reasonable size, but I decided to lay off the galactic side of the Marvel universe for this roster, which unfortunately then hit the next character, Yondu. Another character I'd put in A- tier if I was to give 8 slots to the others, simply because he's the original leader of the Guardians in the comics, and his ability to control arrows that he fires would make him a more interesting take on Hawkeye's gameplay. Jubilee. If I wasn't determined to go with Domino for my personal X-Men pick, Jubilee would have been my choice. Why? Her powers are fireworks, and I like explosions. Blade. While he is a Marvel character and part of the Marvel Universe, his more isolated nature makes me wonder if they'd go for him. He's cool, in fact he's probably the coolest anti-hero Marvel has besides Ghost Rider, but there are characters more likely than him to appear, and characters I personally want to see more. She-Hulk. After that awful Disney Plus show, I would just like to see the proper She-Hulk again. She's a fun character, both gameplay and personality-wise, and deserves better than whatever the hell that show was trying to do. But I just couldn't justify any of the slots to her. And with that, you now have my ideal roster for Marvel FighterZ, or Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls. You know who I think will get in, and who I would personally want in. What are your predictions and wish lists for this game? Tell me down in the comments, I'm really interested to hear on this one.